Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Tech Showdown. My name is Kevin, and today we're going to have a battle of the non-reference GTX 980s. So in one corner we're going to have the MSI Gaming 4G GTX 980 going up against, stay, good, the Asus Strix GTX 980. So this one will be quite interesting to see which one will come out on top. Now let's first talk about the GPU that's in both of these. So it's the GM204 Maxwell GPU that's still on the 28nm process. Now these both feature 2048 CUDA cores and 4GB of GDDR5 on a 256-bit bus at 7010 MHz, so no difference in the memory speeds on either of these cards. Now, as far as differences go between the two, aside from coolers and all that, there's actually not that much. So the highest GPU speed I saw with both of these cards, because they obviously feature GPU Boost 2.0, so it'll go up higher than what it's actually rated at, was 1328 MHz for the MSI Gaming 4G, whereas on the Strix it only boosted up to 1290 MHz, so a little bit less than the MSI Gaming 4G. Although that probably isn't going to matter that much if you're going to overclock anyways, but for people that aren't going to overclock, then it can vary a little bit between each card, but for the most part that should be in the ballpark of where yours will be. Aside from that, they both have upgraded components, which is good. That means that in theory the card will have a longer lifespan, and for the overclockers out there, that will mean that you will get a better overclock due to it being a smoother power delivery to the GPU itself. And the only other difference is really the power input. So the Strix takes a single 8-pin and a single 6-pin, whereas the MSI takes dual. Whoops. Oh, Steve. It takes dual 8-pins. So that doesn't. I don't know. It might matter for some people on the very extreme end of overclocking, but honestly, I take that with a grain of salt. These cards are very efficient. The reference model just has dual 6-pin power connectors, and that thing goes, overclocks pretty damn fast. So honestly, I don't think that is too much of a deal. Now, getting into the coolers themselves, and we'll start with the Twin Frozer 5 cooler that you'll find on the Gaming 4G. So this features its Torx fans, which are 10 centimeters big. Now these fans have kind of like a bit jutting out on every second fan blade. It kind of juts a bit and is made of a slightly different plasticky material, a bit more smoother. Now, that apparently MSI says that this reduces air turbulence, which means that you will get less noise from the cooler itself, and also increases airflow through the heat sinks. It features their Super Sous heat pipe technology, which apparently allows greater heat pipe efficiency, which means better heat dissipation. Their hybrid frozer technology, which is actually kind of interesting. So the fans work independently of each other, and we'll be talking about that a bit later on, so stay tuned for that. And then their airflow control, which is basically, it's just little indents basically throughout the heatsink, which directs the airflow better over the heat pipes. So yeah, they apparently say that helps quite a bit with the cooling of the card, but honestly, I don't think that would help that much. I mean, Gigabytes, I say that, but at the same time, Gigabyte with their WindForce cooler, which has been around since like Noah's Ark, has their triangle cool technology, which is a very similar thing. And Gigabyte's always said that's worked very well, and those WindForce coolers always do perform very well, no matter what they've been on. All the ones I've tested over the years have always done very well. Now, the Strix, on the other hand, it's basically a direct C2 cooler. So if you've seen a direct C2 Asus card before, then this is the same thing. It's just had a little bit of a makeover, so the shrouding's a bit different. These fans are a little bit different. They've thrown out the hybrid fan they used to have on this front fan down here, which used to be like a hybrid blower kind of fan design, which I was always a bit suspect of. But yeah, so they've just gone for just a standard design, and it features their huge 10mm heat pipe out the top here, which is absolutely massive, and their 8mm heat pipes down the bottom here. And as I've said before, I always thought of the direct C2 cooler as really good, so it's basically the same thing, just with different shroud and fans. It's also worth noting that the Strix has a back plate, a nice one too. I really like the design on it, whereas the MSI Gaming 4G does not. So that might, you know, some people might not like that, but it is what it is. Honestly, in my personal opinion, just throwing it out there, I don't see why they shouldn't have backplates anymore. I mean, the reference model comes with a backplate, so every non-reference model should have one. That's the way I think of it. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Now, getting into sizes. So, the MSI comes in at 279 millimeters long by 140 millimeters wide by 36 millimeters tall. So not too bad size-wise. They are still quite large, so depending on your case type you might run into troubles, but overall they're not too bad. Nowhere as huge as something like a Vapor X 290 like the one in my system. And now the Strix. So the Strix is coming in at 288 millimeters long, so a bit longer, 134 millimeters wide, so not as wide as the MSI Gaming 4G, but it's coming in at 40 millimeters tall, so a little bit taller. That's probably the backplate adding that much. Honestly, backplates do add a little bit of height there. So without further ado, we will get straight into the benchmarks then. Whoa, don't fall over. As I said earlier, there is a difference in the clock speeds in slight favor of the MSI, but that doesn't always count, as we'll see. So we'll start by so these GTX980s and 970s, this Maxwell GPU in them. It's a bit funny with some of the tests. That's why I don't do all my usual testing. So we're just going to go straight into heaven. But one thing I did change this time is these cards are mega overkill for 1080p gaming, depending on the type of game. Unless it's a very, very, you know, high requirement game, they're pretty much going to be overkill for the vast majority of 1080p games out there. So I decided to not do any 1080p testing this time and make the minimum 1440p, which is what I think a single GTX 980 is most suited to be at. So let's start with Heaven 4.0. This is DirectX 11, 1440p, everything maxed out. The MSI Gaming 4G scored 37.8 frames per second average. The Asus Strix GTX980 scored 39.1 frames per second average. So an actual win there for the Asus over the MSI. That was quite interesting. I was quite surprised. Now Heaven again, this time in OpenGL, once again everything maxed out, 1440p. The MSI Gaming 4G, 34.3 frames per second average. The Asus Strix, 35.6 frames per second average. So a little bit more of a win there for the Strix. I am quite surprised. Now, moving on now to BioShock Infinite. This is on user setting 2 at 1440p. The MSI Gaming 4G, 59 frames per second average. Almost got to 60 frames. That's with everything maxed out in BioShock, by the way, DirectX 11. Now, the Asus Strix 980, 59 frames per second average. They scored exactly the same. So that's a really, really good score with everything maxed out. All you'd need to do would be drop, say, one of the filters down a little bit, and then you'd probably have a consistent over 60 frames per second gaming experience. And to round it out, Tomb Raider. Now I did this at 4K, so getting up there now. This is everything maxed out with our VSync off at 4K. So the MSI Gaming 4G scored 30.5 frames per second average, and the Asus Strix scored 30.9 frames per second average, so 0.4 frames difference. So what do these benchmarks tell us? Well, basically these are just completely neck and neck. There's going to be no difference really. Well, it'll be within margin of error when putting these cards against each other. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt. But what do we know from the different resolutions and from me testing them? Because I may as well just tell you now. So 1080p, they do everything. Every game I throw at them, maxed out, perfect. You know, these 980s are incredibly powerful graphics cards. Now at 1440p, they were doing most games completely maxed out, or you know, very close to maxed out. So a single 980 will do 1440p gaming very well. It should handle most things pretty well. Now at 4K, and by pretty well I'm meaning above 60 frames per second, because that's kind of like the mark I look at. Most of us are running 60 Hz monitors. And now 4K, so this one's a bit more difficult. So if you don't mind, like say if you have a 4K 30 Hz monitor, or you don't mind just gaming at 30 frames per second around there, then they will do 4K gaming decently. We'll put it that way. A single 980 would be what I would say the absolute minimum power requirement for 4K gaming. That's the way I'd put it. But you're probably, for the ideal experience, you'll be able to run the games at 4K, you know, depending on the type of game, remember. This is just a big generalization from my experience. You'll be able to run them at 4K, but you'll probably have to bump the settings down quite a bit. Usually like a medium-ish setting will do. In general at 4K, and that'll give you the above 60 frames per second in some of the games. But overall, both of them very close together. They both did very, very well. Now, moving on to temperatures. So this is an interesting one, and this is kind of like the main difference that people want to know, because people are going to be buying them to overclock a lot of the time, and they want to know how they perform thermally, so you know you have the most thermal headroom when it comes to overclocking. So for temperatures, I ran both of these cards in my firm arc test, which was at 1080p, 4x MSIA for 15 minutes. And I took the highest temperature they went to and the highest fan speed they went to. So we'll start with the MSI Gaming 4G. And during the firm arc test, this rose all the way up to 69 degrees Celsius. And that was at 57% fan speed. So that's still very, very good. I mean, these 980s and 970s do run really cool, and I don't think I've tested either of them that's run over 70 degrees yet, which is just crazy from flagship cards like this, especially when you consider what you get from AMD. I know some of the non-reference AMD cards, as we've tested, do very well, but yeah, these 980s and 970s are a very cool running card by comparison. Now, the Asus Strix, on the other hand, with its DirectC2 type cooler on it, went up to 68 degrees Celsius, and that was at 44% fan speed. So what does that tell us? Well, basically, all it means is that if it's at a lower fan speed, then you should be able to later on, when you're overclocking, run a more aggressive fan curve on it, and it should give you a bit more thermal headroom, even though these cards performed very similar in terms of temperatures. Now, one thing to note while we're on the topic of temperatures and fans is that when these fans would turn on, so these both cards, the fans will not be turned on at all. There's 0 decibel technology in them. So when you're doing more moderate things, or minimal things, I should say, like you know, just browsing the internet and stuff like that, the fans won't be on either of them. Now, it's interesting in where the fans turn on. So on the Strix, both fans turn on at the same time at 65 degrees Celsius. Bang on the mark. 65, both fans will turn on just like that. Which is quite interesting, because the Strix was actually slightly cooler than the MSI. And yet the MSI, one fan, this rear fan here, would turn on at 55 degrees Celsius, and this front fan would turn on at 62 degrees Celsius. So that's quite interesting, that the fans on the MSI turn on quicker and at different times, yet it still requires more fan speed and cools slightly less efficiently than the Strix. So quite interesting there. Now, moving on to noise. So as always, I'll let you guys judge for yourself the difference. There's no point showing you guys what they're like at idle, because the fans aren't on, so there's no noise whatsoever. They're both completely silent at idle. Coil whine wise, they're both pretty good for the most part. Nothing too extraordinary. I mean, there still is coil whine, but it's nothing that bad, take it from me. So yeah, let's jump straight into it with the noise. So this is during the Unigine Valley benchmark at 1440p, and this is what the MSI Gaming 4G sounds like. And this is the Asus Strix during the exact same benchmark. So there's like nothing in it at all. Honestly, I couldn't tell the difference. Personally, I thought even though the MSI does have the higher fan speed, both of these cards are very, very quiet. As I said, coil whine is, just average, nothing too bad, but it's not really good or anything. So yeah, noise-wise, I think they're both excellent. They'll both do most people very well. You're not going to hear them, they're not intrusive or anything like that, so both do a very good job in terms of noise. And that's going to lead us to the conclusion of which one of these I would recommend. So as always, I'm going to take price into consideration, but the prices with these is always varying quite a bit. At least it is in New Zealand, but it will depend on where you live. So I'm going to put it this way. If both of these are at the exact same price, remember I haven't tested these with overclocking, although I do keep an eye on what people tell me from the industry about how these cards overclock, and I hear great things out of both. Honestly, so it's not like one of these cards overclocks better than the other. From what I hear, both of them overclock like absolute crazy. So with that being said, I'm going to have to give it to the Strix. My reasoning being, overall, I think it's the better built card. It has a backplate, which I really like, and it does just add, it just makes the card seem a bit more premium. It should give you better overclocking headroom in terms of thermals, because you have more fan speed to play with, and the cooler did perform a bit better even though the fans came on later than the MSI. And it still did slightly better in the benchmarks, even though it was at a lower clock speed, which I don't actually understand how that makes sense. I ran these over and over, I double checked the GPU speeds, everything, so I don't actually understand why that is. There's probably a reason for it, but I don't know what it is. But yeah, I just think of it as the better card overall, and I think it would do you guys better than the MSI. However, that being said, if there is a price difference between them, say, honestly, even as much as little, I should say, as $30. So if the MSI Gaming 4G is, say, $30 cheaper than the Strix, then I would just recommend it. Honestly, there's not that much difference between them worth paying, too much more either way. So honestly, I would just look for whatever one's cheaper, give or take, $20, $30 either way, and then I'd just get that one. So if the Strix is cheaper where you live, get that one. Or if it's on special, get that one. If the MSI is cheaper, I'd get that. Because honestly, there just isn't that much difference, especially if you're not overclocking. Then I'd just pick either or and go with it. So that's going to round out this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was quite fun to make. The GTX980s and 970s, as I've said before, there doesn't seem to be as much sort of differences between them, especially in performance, but even in thermal stuff like that. They're all very good. They're all very close together. It's not like the 290s where we saw huge differences in cooling between the different models and performance differences. These 980s and 970s all seem quite close together. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, I'll see you next time.